Hamilton wrote, the other 51. How do you ride like you're running out of time? Right day and night like you're running out of time. Every day you fight like you're running out of time. Like you're running out of time, or you're running out of time. How do you ride like tomorrow won't arrive? How do you ride like you need it to survive? How do you ride every second you're alive? Every second you're alive, every second you're alive.
Kevin Van Valkenburg, welcome to the Other 51. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we have a lot to talk about before we even get to writing between Hamilton and Jason Isbell. We could probably do a whole podcast on just that stuff before we even get to the actual purpose of the podcast here. So I remember you did a podcast with Joe Posnanski about a year ago or so about Hamilton, and you saw it with the original cast, right?
I did, yeah.
So since I didn't, you can tell me I didn't miss anything by missing it, right?
I wish I could say that you didn't. If I ever see it again with other casts, I guess I'll be able to better compare. But it was a pretty amazing cultural moment to sort of be there when Lin-Manuel sort of came out, the first time when he sort of. The very first moment he kind of announces himself in the play, just kind of felt like, wow, like I may have shelled out a couple mortgage payments for this, this opportunity to do this, but this is very cool. And yeah, I mean, the whole, I really wonder like how the play works, without Daveed Diggs and without Leslie Odom, because I think they're probably more essential to the play than Lin-Manuel was. So I would be curious to hear, who the actors started playing those roles, how they kind of filled in, for those guys, because I think they're great, especially Leslie Odom. I mean, he's
right.
The reason the whole play kind of comes together. So.
Right, and Burr is such a central character, and he is the central character, kind of that ties everything together. So the Hamilton thing it's obviously still hugely popular, but it's kind of died down from, like you said, it was kind of more of a cultural moment about a year ago. I mean, do you still find yourself a fan of it? Do you find yourself listening to it at all? Do you find yourself still moved by it at all, or is it kind of faded back a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely still. I mean, I'm a sort of a. I've always been a fan of musical theater, and I was in like plays when I was younger as a kid. Nothing like beyond like, when I was 15, I think. But I mean, there's some of the things the Hamilton backlash bugged me a great deal. I think it was sort of in a tough spot in the sense that it was so expensive and so hard to get tickets that a lot of people who didn't see the show were sort of forming opinions about it without really kind of experiencing it. And so, when you're there, I see some people saying, like, I hear the soundtrack and the raps aren't that good. That's just stupid. Like, when you're there and you sort of experience it all, it's incredible. It's kind of magical. And I think, it's like Common was saying, it's like one of the great American pieces of artwork ever. And I think that's actually legit. But we can never have nice things. It's really on social media, and they have to sort of be torn down or something. And no one who I know has seen the play is like, no, this isn't great. Like everyone who's been to it was like, oh my gosh, unbelievable. So
it did always feel like the Hamilton backlash was this is cool, so we have to backlash against it. Like, I don't know how much, I'm sure there are criticisms of the writing and of the history and maybe even of the rap that you can legitimately make, but it did feel kind of like this is popular, so it's like the classic Slate take, right? The why Hamilton is actually terrible or something like that. I'm excited. I get to see it next year. It's on tour and it's coming to Rochester, New York, where I live, and we have season passes. We bought season passes this year specifically, so next year we could get it too. And the other kind of pop culture thing to bring up would be Jason Isbell, because I know you're a big fan of his, and I actually talked about him with Seth Wickersham on this podcast. I actually interviewed Seth the day I was going to see Jason Isbell for the first time. I talked to Seth that morning, and I saw Jason play that night, and so good, just blew me away. How did you? I mean, you know, Isbell's kind of Seth and I were talking. He's kind of like the younger sports writer's Bruce Springsteen, almost. It kind of feels like that. So, what about him? Do you think connects with? Well, what about him connects with you on a personal level? What about his music is so powerful?
I just think that so much of writing is picking the right details to help illuminate a story. And I don't think anybody, maybe in any writing right now, picks better details to tell stories than Jason does. I mean, he is such a visual writer, and he's like a creative writing major at Memphis University. And so I think that he really picked up and understood the way that, you know, you use like kind of literary details to help illuminate things. And when I taught a class at the University of Montana, I would play Isbell sort of throughout things and talk, but I use the song Elephant to sort of talk about, you know, what are the details in the song that make it real, that make it not trite and not sort of cheesy, but make it really stick with you and tell this story, you know, that the story about someone sort of dying of cancer and kind of a friendship that might have been once been romantic. Like, how does he do that in a way that isn't kind of on the nose, but is very subtle? And I just think that, you know, I never really got into Springsteen that much, and it does seem like all sports writers are super into Springsteen, and I think it's just mostly because a lot of people are super into Springsteen. Like,
right.
I don't know that
it's not like it's not like a weird subset of sports. This obscure guy that only sports writers like. Yeah. Right.
But with Isbell, I mean, I was a fan of the Job by Truckers when he was in it, and so when he sort of splintered off or got kicked out of the band for being a drunk, he. I don't know, I just kind of followed him, and it was kind of neat to be in on something early. Like, I remember going to an Isbell show, the 9:30 Club, where, you know, you could stand but by the end of the show, you could walk right up to the front of the stage. Like, and there was not, you know, now I just saw him at Red Rocks, you know, so they were playing in front of thousands of people. It's a huge deal. But back then, you know, I remember a friend of mine saw him at a show similar around the same time where he was still drinking, and afterwards, like, he kind of went to the bar, and the people just walking up to him and talking to him, and he was like hanging out, laughing with them. So it's neat that I think kind of feel like you discovered something or someone. But I just think even if you look at other writers, I remember seeing like John Mayer saying that, you know, Isbell's the greatest lyricist of my generation, and that's kind of a pretty good compliment for someone who's like as good of a guitar player as Mayer to sort of say that. You know, I think a lot of, you know, Tom Petty was a big Isbell fan. So it's like, it shows you that other artists and writers really appreciate what he's able to do with words and music.
Yeah, I know the song I think a lot of us point to when we listen to Isbell, especially given politics now, is White Man's World. And obviously the writing in that and the imagery on that, like you were saying, is so vivid and so powerful. But the song of his that struck me was Anxiety, because it's something I have, you know, kind of, you know, moderate to, you know, pretty nasty anxiety issues a lot of the time.
Sure.
And I remember I hadn't heard that song before the concert, and we were sitting, my wife and I were sitting, it was an outdoor amphitheater, so we're sitting on the lawn, and he comes on, and in this tour he's been opening with that. And she looked at me, she's like, "You're going to like this song." And he starts singing, and I was staring at her with my mouth open the entire song. I'm like, there's never been a better description of anxiety and that general like GAD has been best described by this song. Like, if I'm ever in an anxious moment, this is exactly what it feels like. And it just, I don't know how, he's a very simple writer too. Like, he's not a very flashy lyricist, but he's very concrete. I think that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about that song too is that he, you know, people have sort of said, like, his manager, when he played that song, he was like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And he was like, No, it's not necessarily about me. Like, kind of, you know, but honestly, I think Jason plays a little bit with that, because certainly a lot of his songs are very autobiographical, but he also knows that, like, a storyteller's job is not necessarily to tell stories from a first-person point of view all the time. It's to sort of create characters who then are sort of expressing those sentiments. And so it's a little bit mysterious. I mean, I think he in some ways says, this song's not about me. Like, no one thinks that, every Philip Roth character is about Philip Roth or whatever. But it does create a little bit of mystery. Like, I think, to be honest, I mean, having read a lot of Jason Isbell interviews over the years, anxiety is something that certainly has been an issue in his life. And so for him to sort of leave it a little bit mysterious, I wonder if there's a little bit of a kind of like a safety mechanism for him to sort of be distant from it, to say, like, oh, no, that's actually not about me. I'm good or whatever. Whereas, like, he fully admits, like, White Man's World, he wrote it, very much about his daughter and he wrote it on election night after Trump was elected. Like, Outfit is 100% about his real life advice that his dad gave him. Like, Children of Children is very much about the fact that, he was born when his mom was 15 or 16. Like, so he puts a lot of autobiographical details into his songs. And I think with that one, I just wonder if it was kind of on the nose and he just didn't want people to sort of worry, I guess, about his dealing with things. So.
Well, if he doesn't, he's an even better writer than I would anticipate, because, like I said, those are spot on. You mentioned the idea of picking the right details in songwriting and in musical writing and even sports writing and magazine writing, like you do. And obviously, that's such an important thing. I tell my students all the time. Details matter, especially. But the idea of picking the right details, how do you learn? What is the right detail, and how do you kind of hone that, picking the right one or the wrong one?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's sort of like there's a little bit of magic in it, I guess. I mean, what I just sort of think of it all the time is read a ton so that you can kind of understand what details feel unique but also universal. Okay. So I just wrote this story about Eddy Lacy, running back who used to play for Alabama and then the Packers and now plays for the Seahawks. And we were talking, and it was a little bit about, or a lot of it about him basically being sort of mocked online for his weight, and how at some point, like, it turned into like a meme about him. Like, everybody wanted to make an Eddy Lacy's fat joke, and I'd always kind of wondered how he felt about that. And so I kind of approached him and said that I really wanted to talk to him from a place of empathy, and he was open to it. Surprisingly, he never really talked about it. He just said, because it always had really pissed him off. So we talked a lot, and I think we had like a really good interview. And it was a lot about how his family got displaced during Katrina and how he just never felt comfortable in home again, and he had kind of developed these bad eating habits. And I thought, like, I have a decent kind of framework for this story, but I felt like it didn't quite have something that connected. And so I talked to his mom. His mom was telling me the story about how when they had to live in a trailer after Katrina, how it still didn't feel like home, and Eddy was feeling kind of depressed. And she told me a story about how he had said to her, I used to have these glow-in-the-dark stars that would sort of be on my ceiling back in our home back in New Orleans, and I just wish like I had some of those. And she found some, and she put them on the ceiling, and he was like, wow, like this, I just feel like finally, like this is, and as soon as she told me that, I thought, that's a detail that's going to resonate, because it doesn't matter who you are, like black or white, like poor or rich, like almost every kid had those kind of glow-in-the-dark stars.
Right.
And so I used that as a sort of the kicker to the whole story, and for a reason like that one detail connected with so many people that made the story kind of go almost, like one of the more read stories I've written in years. And I think that was the kind of thing, like you could, just sort of focusing on something that feels universal, but that is memorable and unique, and those kind of things. And I was talking about Isbell's story, like that song Elephant. It's not just that like the girl in that story is drinking whiskey, it's that she's drinking Seagram's from a coffee cup. Mm-hmm. Like those kind of things that create such a sort of visual memory, that really is what kind of sticks with you and makes you kind of feel like you're still with the story even after you're done reading it.
So how do you, I mean, is it, you kind of said that you heard that star story and you knew kind of instinctively that was going to be in the story and that was an important detail. And I get, and from my writing, that kind of, you develop that's an instinct you develop. Like you hear something and you know, or you see something and you know it. So, I mean, how do you, and having taught this, how do you develop that instinct? Like, because it can be really easy to, I feel like one of the detail problems, you can go you can go too much, like drinking whiskey out of a Seagram's out of and like describe the coffee cup, and then it just kind of gets too, like almost too specific. So that instinct and that balance of the detail, but not so finely honed that it kind of takes you out of it.
Yeah, I mean, we've all read stories where they're just filled with too much detail, and it gets it in the way of the narrative. I think that it's, I like to think of writing as like getting at bats. Like the part of the problem, I guess, with the modern media environment now is that we don't have like enough opportunities for young kind of writers to sort of fail in little increments and get better and get better and get better. So if you're good at this, you graduate from college and you can get a job, you're probably thrown right into like a major beat, or maybe you think like, oh, well, the way for me to break in is to write a 5,000 word story. And, so you write a 5,000 word story and it's just kind of okay because you don't really understand like structure and detail stuff. For me, like the way that I got to do this, I guess at the certain level, is just writing like high school stories for the Baltimore Sun for 3 years, and then writing like stories covering Navy football and Maryland football, and I think, I guess, the way that I always try to tell kids is that the way that you get better at this is just to write constantly. And if you have to write just for yourself, or if you're just doing blogging, make sure that you like show that to people that you trust. And I have a pretty good network of friends, and Seth, who's on the podcast today, was one of them. And so I will show him stuff and sort of say, hey, what do you think about this? And he, because he's been doing this for 20 years, has a really sharp eye and says, this sentence is too much, or this is, and he and Mike do that with each other, and like Eli Saslow used to do that with me, and like I have a lot of friends who are much better writers than I, and so they kind of help. If I feel like I need help, sort of trim things down. There are people, it's kind of like on one end you have like Foster Wallace, on the other hand you have like, I guess, Hemingway. Like there's people who overstuff stories, and there's people who like undersell stories. And I'm more towards, the underselling kind of side. And, but that doesn't mean like I don't need to have some details in. I think if you just read a ton and you figure out like what works for you, like I think Eli Saslow is better than anybody at picking the right details just enough so that it never gets in the way of the narrative, that you feel like you're there, but you're not tripped up and just stumbling over it and stuff. And so, you need a good editor who, good editors aren't always good writers, but they have good eyes for, what works there and what doesn't. And I think it's just being willing to show your stuff to people and then be open to, like, hey, this doesn't work, or hey, you need to really rewrite this. Like rewriting, my buddy Wright is a huge rewriter. I'm more of a person who like needs every sentence to feel kind of right before I move on.
Okay.
And some people like write through in one furious burst and then go back and like just eliminate tons of stuff. And I'm just kind of more of the kind of person who it's like building bricks, like one sentence at a time. I feel like I'm good. By the time I get to the end of the story, I feel pretty good about it, even though I'm not going to necessarily go back and rewrite a ton of it.
That's interesting. I mean, I'm the write a burst and then edit guy, and 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But it's interesting to hear that you're the slow writer, especially coming from a newspaper background and a sports writing newspaper background, because that's obviously very deadline driven and very fast. So it's funny. I would have assumed you would have been the other way and less kind of methodical in writing and kind of more just on professional experience, kind of fast.
Yeah, it was never, I think I overthink it sometimes, and magazine stories for me, feel like they have more weight to them, and so maybe it's my own anxiety that I'm kind of putting into each of the sentences or whatever. But when certainly writing for a newspaper helped a lot in terms of I'll write. I cover golf for ESPN2. Like I'll go to all the majors and write columns and stuff. And so then you might have, an hour and a half to write 1,200, 1,500 words after a big event, like because at the British Open this year when Spieth kind of went nuts and had an up and down wild final round, and the Masters and stuff. A few years ago, I was there when Jordan hit 2 in the water on 12, and you have to write quickly. You have to choose like the right details on your first try in those sense. And so that my newspaper background has helped a lot in those moments. But when I write long stuff, it'll take me, a couple weeks. Sometimes I'll write it all in one verse, but I'll feel like it just isn't particularly good. And I wish I had more time doing it. I'm not sure why exactly that is, but I just feel like for magazine stuff, I feel that much more pressure to get it right. And so that's why, I guess.
Yep. So the Eddy Lacy story, which was awesome. It was a really well done piece. I enjoyed it. It's going to be in show notes for this episode. One thing I did want to ask about that is you put yourself in the story about halfway through. You kind of talked about you having lunch with Eddy Lacy and both being bigger guys, I think was the exact line in there. And you didn't, I thought it was interesting because you didn't kind of dwell on it. You didn't make the story all of a sudden it was about you. It was, kind of a quick hit, you're in, you're out. And I'm just wondering, what was behind that decision? Why did you decide to insert yourself in the story like that and in that way?
I felt like it made it, the reason that Eddy was willing to do the story is because he knew he was talking to sort of a kindred spirit in that sense. And so if I felt like that made it more honest to be like, why is Eddy talking about this? Like it wasn't like he was like looking for a place to like unburden this. Like I went to him and said, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this. And I think that we can relate about this because I know what it's like to sort of, hate the fact that you can't lose the 10, 15 pounds that you need to. And so I felt like that made it more honest to kind of put it out there. Because otherwise, does it feel like Eddy's trying to make excuses for this and that? Like, no, I'm the one who wanted to do this story and here's the way he agreed to it. I think that, I'm really against like rules in journalism. Like I think that there's no one way to do something, and so people who are like, you should never have first person in stories, like I think that's such a dumb statement because so many great stories written over the years have had some first person in them. And if you feel like that's essential to the understanding of the narrative, like and there's no way I would ever like want that story to be about me because it's not. Like if you're reading ESPN The Magazine, you don't give a shit about Kevin Van Valkenburg's sort of weight struggles, but it does sort of make it feel a little bit more relatable and universal. And I got a ton of notes from people who are saying like, wow, like that was so, so I've related to that so much. And I just think that one kind of element of like, why are we here? It's saying to the reader essentially, well, we're here because I thought this would be an interesting person, and this is the reason that he opened up to me. And I think that those things are, if it doesn't get in the way of the narrative, then that's the right choice to do as the writer, to sort of say, I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into why I understand this dilemma when some other people might not.
Yeah, I always try to say in my class, I'm like, they're not rules. It's the Pirates of the Caribbean line. They're not rules. They're more guidelines. So don't put it. You don't usually use first person, but if it works, it does. Don't lead with a quote unless it's that 0.1% of a quote that's perfect, and then you lead with that quote. So,
sure.
And you taught too, and you taught at Montana. Was it for a year that you taught?
It was a semester.
A semester, okay. And I have your reading list in the show notes too, because I still reference that. It's still great. I love one of the things I love in there is the way that you kind of talk about building to like a full-length narrative. Like you can't write 5,000 words until you've written 300 words, and then 500 words and 1,000. And I think that's such a powerful way to kind of, teach learning. It is like I say to my students, it's like scales with a musician. Like you still have to play get good at that, and then you can kind of build up to it.
Totally.
But I'm wondering too, how much did that semester of teaching, did that help your writing at all? Does that influence how you write at all?
Certainly reading I had saved those pieces throughout the years of just because they were some of my favorites, and I basically decided if I was going to teach and really, I was only going to teach that one semester. I wasn't really like subject to oversight from the dean or anything like that. I could just kind of teach whatever class I wanted to, and so I basically decided I'm just going to have them read all of my favorite things, and we're going to talk about why they work or don't work, and we're going to talk about storytelling in general. And so when I would sort of review the stories and highlight them and make notes of them, the nights or the, leading up to the classes, it reminded me why I liked them so much, and it made me think about them in sort of really analytical ways. And I think it definitely helped me remember, like, what are the reasons why I'm teaching this, and how can I kind of use it as a refresher to put back into my own writing. I wrote a piece about Peyton Manning, like in the middle of that semester, where I just went to like a Thursday night football game in Kansas City where the Broncos were playing, and we needed some sort of Peyton Manning is getting old. How long can this last story? And I basically had like 4 days to pull it together, and I was really stressing a little bit about how am I going to make this work. And I just watched him in the locker room, like, peel off his armor, in a sense, like his pads, and what a struggle that was. And basically just wrote down everything that I could, like, tried to capture every little detail as he was sort of getting ready for post-game interviews and stuff, and what a kind of struggle that was, in a sense. And that was like a good reminder, in the sense of, like, okay, give people some details that they can't get, like when they're watching on TV. And that basically, like, framed the whole story. Like that, that helped in that sense to make it kind of go everywhere. Like everyone was like, wow, Peyton Manning really is getting old. And I don't know that I would have thought like that if I hadn't been teaching at the time. I hadn't been sort of really had my conscious heightened, I guess, about what kind of details to look for to sort of show. Because then I knew, like, my students, I was like, all right, here's an example of, like, me being present with them while I'm teaching, and I got to show them that I actually know what I'm talking about. And so when that ran, they were like, oh my God, like, how did you write that story? Like, I was like, you can't really use excuses about how you're too busy, because look, I just wrote a magazine story, and I'm here teaching you guys, and I'm advising the student newspaper, so I don't want to hear excuses about how it's all too hard to do, because I'm juggling this and I have 2 kids. So.
Is that why reading is so important to you as a writer, and so important in general as a writer?
Is what? Why is it? Just because
that I mean, you talked about why reading is so important, but it kind of gets you in that frame of mind and kind of reminds you of, like, what you should do or what you can do.
Yeah, I mean, I read. I probably read 3 or 4 long stories every day. Like, okay. I read a ton, and I think that's part of writing, right? I mean, all of my friends who are really good writers are just constantly reading, whether it's fiction, whether it's magazine stories or what. And it's just, like, sharpens your mind to what's possible and makes you really think, oh, yeah, I've never thought about trying that. Wow, what a creative way to look at, that kind of story. And, when I listen to music like Isbell or whatever, like, I'm thinking of it in that sense too. Like, oh man, what a beautiful turn of phrase that doesn't feel like effort. It feels effortless in the way that Jason said this lyric. And so I think if you didn't do that, I don't know how people could write without reading. There's just this really funny profile of this poet, Ravi Kapoor, who's just in, like, I think The Cut, and she talked about how she didn't ever read when she's writing, and the piece is written sort of like mocking her.
I've seen people making referencing this online the last few days.
Yeah, I mean, it's laughable to think that, like, you could write really well. I mean, she seems like she's kind of a hack of a poet, but that you could write without like reading, because that's how people learn to write. It's just by. I mean, like, do you think musicians would ever, like, write music without listening to other musicians? Like, the idea is laughable, but she's making a lot of money. So,
so what's the best thing what's the best thing you've read lately?
Oh, I mean, I feel like the best magazine story that I've read this year is this story about this boxer who almost killed another boxer, written by Tom Janot, and what he did in the fighting issue. That was just the way that it was structured was incredible. I just reread a story that Wright Thompson did about 10 years after Katrina, and I think it's 25,000 words. I just was in New Orleans, and so I wanted to reread it. And the amount of reporting and detail and nuance that Wright put into that story is unbelievable. I mean, it's having just been in New Orleans and feeling connected to the city, and then going back and reading what Wright did was. It just made me so admire what he put into that story, because the ambition was incredible, and he nailed it too. And I think a lot of people maybe didn't read that story because it was so long, but man, it was so good. Just last night I read a story that Caitlin Flanagan wrote about the hazing death at Penn State. I mean, the detail in that story at the end, the way that she kind of talked about the final moments of this kid who died made me want to throw up, but it was unbelievably good. I mean, I try to just read literally as much as I possibly can, because you never know what's going to spark that next sort of thing of creativity in your mind. And some of it can be intimidating, where you think, like, God, my stuff can never be as good as this, but I think you can't help but want to sort of just constantly try to find the next piece that you love.
Yeah, there's a great piece. My best thing I've read this week was from the New York Times Magazine. It was a profile of John McPhee, the writer from who teaches at Princeton, and it's the mind of John McPhee. And McPhee actually has a new book out about his writing process, which I can't wait to read.
Okay.
But this is McPhee's one of those writers that I don't think, like, if you're a writer, you've read him and you know him. I don't think he's like super well known outside of the writing community, but just a wonderful. I mean, in terms of details and structure of pieces, and like getting you to care about stuff you wouldn't normally care about. And he's as good as it gets. And the piece in the Times was by Sam Anderson. I'll throw a link to all of these in the show notes too. So, Kevin, if people want to follow you and find your stuff, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Valkenburg, and you can just throw my name into the search engine at ESPN.com, and all of my stuff will pop up there. So that's the best way.
Awesome. Well, this has been a real treat. Thanks so much for joining me today.
You bet, Chris. Thanks.